Some sequels are so bad that they make the original look even better than it was before based on just how much they dropped the ball. But this isn't limited to bad sequels. Great sequels can also make the first game better retroactively too, in a good way. I'm Cy for WhatCulture.com, and these are 10 video game sequels that made the original even better. Number 10. Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic 2. The sequel to Knights of the Old Republic had a lot to prove, especially since BioWare was no longer at the helm, but instead we got Obsidian Entertainment, the guys who would go on to make Fallout New Vegas. And much like Fallout New Vegas, bad project scheduling led to the game coming out rushed and missing a ton of content. But even with the vanilla game, the story shines through as something that improves Knights of the Old Republic in retrospect. For one, it goes way more into Darth Revan's history, his reasoning for turning on the Jedi, thanks to the point of view character being one of Revan's former soldiers, and one of your first companions being Revan's first master, Kreia, who also happens to be one of the best written characters in Star Wars, if you ask some people. It also adds shades of grey to the light versus dark conflict seen in the original, which feels complementary to what the previous game set up rather than contradictory. Knights of the Old Republic becomes just one side of the story, the other side of which is provided by its sequel. Number 9. Kingdom Hearts 2. One thing you need to know about Kingdom Hearts co-creator Tetsuya Nomura is that he really loves belts. Oh, and he's also an eccentric, offbeat storyteller whose writing often comes off as improvisational, but when previous entries are analysed, it doesn't take long for certain prior clues to jump out at you. That is a very padded way of saying the man is a Looney Tune who put more intricate thought into a Disney tie-in game for the PS2 than he really should have. Kingdom Hearts 2, on top of being one of the poster boys for how to make a good sequel on a gameplay level, enhances the story of the original by doubling down on the complexity. From hints centering around the nobodies found in the many Ansem reports hidden throughout the game to Xehanort being a secret boss, Kingdom Hearts 2 expands on all of this and proves just how far ahead Nomura was thinking. Sure, its writing is anything but concrete, in fact it's more like a big cloud of words, but that's par for the course for the franchise at this point. Number 8. Final Fantasy X-2. Final Fantasy X-2 might not be the best Final Fantasy game out there, but as a continuation of Final Fantasy X, it's about as perfect as it gets from a storytelling and world-building perspective. At the end of Final Fantasy X, the entire status quo of the world is irreparably upturned. In short, both the government and religion is pretty much ruined, leaving the world of Spira overall having to start from scratch. Thus comes along Final Fantasy X-2's premise of what happens to a world after it's been saved. Like with Knights of the Old Republic 2, seeing this other side of the world after the big epic journey makes it a brilliant companion piece to the original. Playing X-2 drives home just how much of the Spirans' lives revolved around the ever-present threat of sin in the original. How so much of their economy, lifestyle and communal relationships had to constantly account for the very real possibility that, out of nowhere, a giant magical whale demon will just pop out and say, nope, you guys are gonna die today. X-2's Spira, meanwhile, is practically unrecognisable, with the nations of the world having to put themselves back together and figure out who they are when at peace. It's also fun to see Yuna, who is smothered by her dark calling in the original, burst out of her shell into a badass, fun-loving, gun-slinging treasure hunter, which sounds jarring at first but feels natural when playing the games back to back. Number 7. Batman Arkham City. Arkham Asylum cleverly teased a wider world outside its gothic walls, feeling like both its own thing while also being an amalgamation of all previous incarnations of the character. City, however, knew that tightrope can only be walked for so long before you have to mark your own identity on a property, and so better establish the universe this version of Batman inhabits. Miraculously, it does this without contradicting anything brought up in Asylum's lore, but this makes sense when you realise the sequel was being planned from the beginning. There's a secret room in Warden Sharp's office you can access with a clever appliance of explosive gel that shows the blueprints for Arkham City a year before the game's announcement. Showing that Sharp, Hugo Strange and Ra's al Ghul had been planning this for a long time, Asylum went from a representation of Batman as a whole to the first chapter in a wholly unique take on the Caped Crusader, all thanks to the sequel. Number 6. Portal 2. Certainly one of the most perfect sequels to a game ever made, Portal 2 improves the retrospective viewing of the original by answering pretty much every question left lingering at the end of Portal 1. Where did Aperture Science, let alone GLaDOS, even come from? How long has protagonist Shell been stuck there? Portal 2 dedicates an entire section of the game to answering both former questions in one fell swoop, all while staying coy about the exact timeline. All we know is it's definitely been a while. Okay, but what is all this testing even for? Science! Portal didn't need a sequel because all the questions that were actually important to the story were answered in the first game. But it's astounding how much Valve was able to wring out of those scant remaining dangling plot threads. threads. Both games stand perfectly fine on their own, but together they become one of the all-time great science fiction comedies ever made. And considering Portal started off as a side experiment you got in the orange box bundle with Team Fortress 2 and Half-Life 2, well, that's quite the achievement. Number 5, PSYCHONAUTS 2. Just shy of 2 decades waiting for the sequel to this cult classic platformer, and by God it was worth it. PSYCHONAUTS originally had a very cut and dry story, which, considering the wait for the sequel, left PSYCHONAUTS fans at least better off than Beyond Good and Evil fans. And since the game sold like garbage, they had to make peace with the idea of never getting one. But lo and behold, Double Fine finally came through. PSYCHONAUTS 2 dives a lot deeper into main character Raz's family, giving players an almost uncomfortably honest look at Raz and his lineage's history. This is combined with more emotionally mature storytelling, which stands in stark contrast to the dark as pitch comedy of the original. Raz faces consequences this time for just barging into a person's mind without permission, after which he begins asking for consents from the people he's helping. Rather than act as a criticism of the first game, 2 positions itself more as a continuation of a specific character arc. The story of 1 leads directly into 2, with the characters growing and changing accordingly. It may have taken multiple console generations, but PSYCHONAUTS 2 is one of the most natural feeling sequels in all of gaming. Number 4, YAKUZA 6, The Song of Life. There's a good reason Sega released the smash hit prequel YAKUZA 0 and a full from the ground up remake of the first game before YAKUZA 6, because it really has been all leading up to this. The story of Yakuza, or Like a Dragon as we should be calling it now, has pretty much been the same in every game after the first. Kiryu wants to leave the Yakuza because he's a good man, and because he's a good man, he fails. Even in the best ending of each game, there's always a catch, always a price, because Kiryu did the right thing, and the right thing often hurts. One would think 6, intended and marketed as the true ending, would cut him a break, but Yakuza sticks to its guns all the way through. The finale of Like a Dragon 6 elevates every game that came before it, ending on the perfect thematic note as Kiryu disappears into anonymity, leaving all his friends and family behind, summing up his entire journey. Doing the right thing can seem impossible, hurt like hell, and will often take more than it gives, but the right thing still needs to be done. Oh, he's coming back for Yakuza 8. Okay, well, I mean, you could have cut this guy some slack, but maybe not. Number 3, Sly 3, Honor Among Thieves. The Sly Cooper franchise has always been about the potential toxicity of reputation and legacy. Our family lineage, not to mention the personal impact one makes on the world, can be fulfilling, but it can become a milestone around your neck. The Cooper line was a noble thing, a family of Robin Hoods trying to take back from criminals and the ultra-wealthy, but Sly 3, building on what came before, shows that very little long-term good had come of this. Ultimately, Sly realizes the only path to true fulfillment is to let go and put the people around him first. The best part is that you can see this ending being set up from the very beginning. Not in an "oh, we planned this out from the start" kind of way. Sucker Punch was nowhere near the financial and creative security needed at the time to plan a whole trilogy, but in a "we're thinking about it enough to make it seem natural when it happens" kind of way. This is demonstrated through that theme of legacy and reputation being the spine of all 3 games, from the insecurities of the bosses in 1 and 2 being what drove them to become criminals, to the twisted origins of series villain Clockwork and his spiteful hatred of the Cooper line. That kind of storytelling is a careful balancing act, but Sucker Punch pulled it off masterfully. Number 2, Red Dead Redemption 2. The original Red Dead Redemption was a great game and a beautifully written story in its own right that wraps up nicely at the end. Technically, Red Dead Redemption 2 is a prequel, but as a follow-up, it does some wonderful things. This entry is at number 2 mainly due to finding a way to make Red Dead Redemption somehow sadder than it already was. While there were hints of Marston's past with his old gang that he hunts at the behest of the government in Red Dead 1, Red Dead Redemption 2 showcases the gang in their prime, as the whole thing leads up to the events of John Marston ending up on that leash in the first place. The story of Arthur Morgan trying desperately to hold his found family together gives the original so much more weight, as now you know what's been lost. Red Dead Redemption definitely did a great job at making the player feel sorry for Marston, but there was a separation from his past due to you not being that clued into what happened. 2, however, shows the whole thing in painful detail. After so much death and misery in Red Dead 2, the player is left relieved that John gets out mostly okay in the end, only to remember how the first game closes out. And number 1, God of War Ragnarok. Santa Monica Studios' continuation of the God of War series was always meant to be 2 entries meant to bring down the curtain on the story of Kratos. The 2018 title was a fantastic game and story in its own right, but Ragnarok is so natural and flowing a sequel, the 2 become inseparable from each other, the idea of playing one but not the other being utterly ludicrous. The story of the 2 games is the story of Kratos learning that there is never a point where you cannot choose to be better. Everyone is capable of change and deserves the opportunity to be able to, but they need to choose that for themselves. Ragnarok is a natural continuation of that theme, as Kratos is faced with constant temptation to revert back to his old ways, very nearly falling into a complete relapse partway through the game. You can choose to be better, says Ragnarok, but that's a choice you need to make every day, especially when doing things how you used to seems like an easier path. Ragnarok doesn't just make the previous game better, it makes the original trilogy and wider series essential by its existence, as Kratos' past in Greece is constantly brought up, both literally and thematically. It really does feel, as impossible as that obviously is, that it was always going to end this way. And that's the list. Let us know what you thought of this video down in the comments below. Which of these sequels did you like the best? And of course, let us know of any others that would fit in with this theme. Make sure you like this video, share it with your friends, subscribe and hit that notification bell. Head over to WhatCulture.com for more content every day. I've been Cy for WhatCulture, and have a good week.